Texas is known not only for its deserts, swamps, and canyons, but also for a series of mysterious disappearances of people under completely normal circumstances. Experienced travelers and ordinary vacationers disappear in the state's national parks and popular tourist areas. They vanish suddenly and without a trace, sometimes right in front of their friends and loved ones. Despite extensive searches involving rescue teams, dogs, and helicopters, there are still no answers to these mysterious cases. Today, you will hear 3 stories that remain disturbing reminders of how quickly and inexplicably a person can disappear, even in well-known places. Before the video starts, I want to remind you that your support is very important, so don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Sam Harris, a 32-year-old man who loved fishing and hiking, disappeared on a hot June day in 1994 on Lake Caddo. The place itself was considered not only picturesque, but also somewhat mysterious. Lake Caddo is overgrown with cypress trees and surrounded by dense, marshy banks where moss and vines hang from twisted branches. The entire landscape sometimes looks like a scene from a movie about mystical swamps. It was this atmosphere that attracted Sam, who loved secluded spots where he could cast his line in peace, listen to the cries of herons, and forget about the noise of the big city. According to his friends Tom and Nick, who had accompanied Sam to the lake, the whole trip was planned as a short 2-day fishing trip without any frills. They stopped at a small, dilapidated pier on the western shore of the lake, where an old house, once used for boat rentals, now stood empty. Locals often fished in the area, knowing that you could catch some good perch and catfish there. On that day, around June 12, 1994, the 3 friends set about their usual business early in the morning, setting up their gear, arranging their chairs, and enjoying the silence. The weather was humid, with the sun peeking through storm clouds that promised possible precipitation. Tom recalled that Sam had seemed excited since morning, constantly talking about a spot where he thought the fishing would be good. Nick, a little tired from the road, jokingly waved him off, asking him to give him some time to get settled. By lunchtime, the friends had caught a few small fish, nothing serious, but everyone was still in high spirits. Sam, as usual, was brimming with ideas. "Let's move a little further down the shore. There are fewer people there and the fish are more cautious," he suggested. "Maybe we can cast our lines under a snag for the evening bite." But his friends were in no hurry to change locations. According to Nick, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the 3 of them were sitting on folding chairs at the water's edge, chatting about the latest game of their favorite baseball team. The hot, humid air permeated everything around them. At one point, Sam suddenly said he wanted to fill a bottle with some lake water to wet his bait and rinse his hands. It didn't seem unusual. The water was nearby, just a few feet away. He took off his cap, placed it next to his chair, stood up with his fishing rod in one hand, or, according to another version, he left the rod but took the empty bottle, and walked over to the water. According to recollections, it was literally 15 or 16 feet away. "I saw him bend over the water, then look away," Tom said. "Maybe I glanced at the float, which had started to bob." Nick claimed that at that very moment he was looking for something in his bag. The point is that both of them lost sight of Sam for a split second. 2 minutes passed, and the friends looked around. Sam was gone. At first they weren't alarmed, deciding that he might have walked a little further along the shore. Walking along the edge of the lake past the low bushes, they didn't find him or even see any traces of him. It all seemed strange. Could Sam have left without warning? They searched the nearest bushes and started calling loudly. 10 minutes later, they were worried. They called Sam, but there was no answer. No splashes. His friends became alarmed and quickly walked to the old pier to see if he had gone there for some equipment, but it was empty. They asked a couple of fishermen nearby who shrugged. "We didn't see anyone, just the 3 of you fishing." Gradually, they realized that Sam had essentially disappeared in a matter of minutes, in clear weather, without a sound or a struggle. Nick ran to the car to get to the nearest village and call the rescue service. By evening, county police officers, local volunteers, and then officers from the hunting and fishing department arrived at the scene. Everyone began searching the coastal thickets, looking under driftwood and in the shallow water. There were no signs of a fallen man, no clothing or traces of a struggle. Tom and Nick swore that Sam had not mentioned anything about wanting to leave the shore, and there was no reason for him to go far. All his belongings, including his wallet, were still in his bag. Hours passed, but the missing man was not found. At 2 in the morning, the active search had to be suspended until morning. Darkness, swamp, and dense trees made the search dangerous. At dawn, new volunteers arrived. Dogs, which were given Sam's shirt to sniff, it was lying in the car as a spare, ran along the shore, at first seeming to pick up a scent, but it broke off just at the water's edge, not far from where he had been standing, leaning over the water. Did that mean Sam had gone into the water and drowned? But then there should have been traces. Not to mention that the body could have floated up, and the lake, though treacherous, was not that deep in the coastal zone. Divers checked this part of the bottom and found nothing but bottom algae and a few old cans. There was no body underwater, which puzzled the rescuers. As the days passed, people searched more and more extensively. After 2 days, volunteers brought in boats with echo sounders to explore deeper parts of the lake, but to no avail. They theorized that Sam might have been attacked by an alligator. Alligators were said to inhabit some parts of Lake Caddo, but there was no evidence to support this. Usually such an attack would leave traces of a struggle or torn clothing and blood. However, nothing was found. Skeptics were more likely to say maybe he swam away or drowned somewhere else and was carried away by the current, but the current in Lake Caddo is not that strong, and some of the items would have floated to the surface anyway. Nothing was found in the water. On the 5th and 6th days of fruitless searches, the rescue command began to wind down the active phase. We've tried everything. It looks like the man disappeared in a matter of seconds, and we have no leads on where to go next. Sam's parents, upon learning of the tragedy, rushed from another state and begged for the search to continue. But resources were limited, and day after day the search yielded no results. In the middle of the following week, on the 7th day after his disappearance, the search operation was officially called off. The police filed a missing person report, and the case was added to the archives. Tom and Nick were squeezed like lemons. They felt guilty for not keeping track of their friend and sincerely did not understand what could have happened. But the most incredible fact emerged a month later, when the story of Sam's disappearance was no longer on the front pages of local newspapers. On a Friday evening, July 15th or 16th, at the same old pier, where no one usually fished because it was dilapidated and dangerous, a woman walking along the shore noticed several items of fishing tackle. Looking closer, she realized that there was a fishing rod, a reel, a set of hooks, and a small box of bait, as if someone had just left them there. Remembering the recent disappearance of the fisherman, the woman called the police. Within an hour, officers arrived at the scene and discovered that the gear belonged to the missing Sam. Tom and Nick identified it by the distinctive markings Sam had made on his reel and bait box. Not only that, but his friends swore that the pier had been searched 7 times by people, including themselves, in the first week after his disappearance. Volunteers literally tapped the boards and looked under the decking, but there were definitely no fishing rods there. How did they suddenly appear in plain sight? They weren't hidden in any shelter, but seemed to have been deliberately placed at the edge of the pier so that passers-by could see them. The police conducted another local search, suspecting that someone might have decided to play a cruel joke, or that Sam's body was somewhere nearby, but to no avail. No footprints or new clues were found nearby. The pier itself had been checked several times before, so the theory that the gear had been lying there unnoticed for a month seemed unlikely. However, the official report stated, unidentified persons may have moved the missing person's fishing equipment for unknown reasons. The missing man's friends, who were more inclined to believe in the supernatural, decided that this was a case of someone deliberately planting the items to raise more questions. In the end, this did not help find Sam. His body never surfaced, and no one reported seeing him. All traces ended after 7 days of searching and this strange discovery of fishing gear in mid-July. The police officially stated, "We have no reason to believe that his death was violent, but we also have no evidence that he is alive. If he had simply drowned, what prevented the water from carrying his body away? Rational commentators point out that someone could have found these items in the bushes without realizing what they were, and simply left them on the pier, hoping that the owner would return. Or someone could have deliberately played a game by planting the evidence. However, if that's the case, why didn't anyone report the find immediately? And how did these items remain so intact after a month of rain and heat? Sam Harris's family moved out of the state a few years after the tragedy, unable to bear the pain of constantly seeing Caddo Lake, where mystery enthusiasts periodically returned. Palo Duro Canyon, located in northwestern Texas, is considered the second largest canyon in the United States for good reason. In the middle of the summer of 1997, its scorching rock formations, bizarre layers of red sandstone, and endless expanses were bathed in the midday sun. The canyon's hiking trails attracted travelers with their epic beauty. Among those who decided to take the popular route that July day were 39-year-old Jack Everett and his wife Emily. Their car was parked in the visitor area around 9 a.m. on July 15, 1997, when the heat had not yet taken over, and the air was still tolerable. They planned a typical day hike without any extra baggage. A couple of liters of water for the two of them, some light snacks, a camera, and a sense of joyful anticipation. According to Emily, everything was going smoothly. They walked at a leisurely pace, exchanging joking remarks about the bright colors of the canyon walls. The landscape around them breathed a sultry calm, and they encountered a few other tourists on the narrow trail, all in the mood to see and photograph. As they walked side by side, there was no hint of danger, but the high spirits quickly turned to gloom when, at about 11 o'clock, Jack stopped to tie his shoelaces. The trail ran along a small ledge that sloped slightly upward. Emily said to him, "I'll go ahead and see where the trail leads. Catch up." He nodded. It seemed like Jack would be ready to continue in a matter of seconds. Emily walked about 70 feet along the narrow path, looked around, turned back, and realized that her husband was nowhere to be seen. It all happened in a matter of moments. One moment she saw him standing over his shoes. The next moment there was nothing but empty space. At first she decided that Jack might have decided to take a side path. She called out loudly, "Jack, where are you?" But there was no answer. Returning to where he had been sitting, Emily found no one. She patiently walked around the bushes and peered down the path, but there was no sign of anyone. From the very first moment, she suspected something was wrong. This couldn't be a simple case of him falling behind. There was no reason for Jack to go off in the other direction without saying anything. Fearing that he might have slipped and fallen, Emily ran down the slope toward the dry riverbed, looking down the embankment. Silence, no cries, no rustling. After a few minutes, realizing that the situation was critical, she returned to the beginning of the trail and reported the disappearance to the rangers in the visitor area. They responded quickly. Within an hour, they organized an initial search and questioned other tourists. They asked random people, "Have you seen a man in a white t-shirt and shorts, 39 years old?" Everyone shrugged. At first, they decided that he might have taken the wrong trail and was looking for his wife. But time passed, and Jack did not appear. In the afternoon, dog handlers, local volunteers, and the county police joined the search. It was clear that Palo Duro Canyon did not have any impassable forests, but there were many ledges, cliffs, and rock shelters. In summer, the heat can be deadly if a person does not have enough water. The police questioned Emily. Were there any conflicts? Any reasons for her husband to leave? She shook her head. No, everything was fine. He was just tying his shoelaces. We were only a few feet apart. None of the passing tourists could remember seeing Jack after that moment. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The search dragged on for a week. A couple of helicopters were called in to fly over key areas of the canyon, including sheer walls and narrow paths. They searched ravines and dry riverbeds, looking for scraps of clothing that might have caught on bushes, but found nothing. The dog sniffed Jack's belongings, picked up a scent on the trail, and then lost it after a sharp turn behind a rock ledge. The absence of even the slightest noise or cries for help added to the confusion of the rescuers and the family's friends. The rangers came up with theories. Maybe he fell and suffered a serious head injury, then slid down somewhere and couldn't call for help. But in that case, there would have been at least something. A week passed without a single clue. Finally, the official search was called off, with the county authorities stating, "We have combed the area and deployed air and ground forces. No traces or clues have been found. Mr. Everett is listed as missing." Emily was devastated, but she continued to hope. He has to be somewhere, alive or dead. He can't just vanish into thin air. She hired private investigators several times and offered a reward for any information, but to no avail. In late autumn, when the heat subsided and new volunteers arrived, another search was conducted, also without success. It seemed that the story of Jack Everett would become another unexplained disappearance, destined to sink into the archives. But in the winter of that year, rumors began to circulate that someone had seen a shadow resembling a male figure wandering along the steep slope at night. Of course, this was never confirmed. It was only 6 months later that a development occurred which, instead of providing answers, raised even more questions. In January 1998, tourists who had decided to take an unusual route for photography accidentally stumbled upon a human skull at the foot of a rocky ledge. According to them, the site was in one of the areas where searchers had been several times in the early days of the operation. The police confirmed, yes, it is a human skull, and one of a distinctive shape which, according to dental records, belonged to Jack Everett. There were no other bones, fragments of clothing, or personal belongings around it. Just the skull lying on the surface with no traces of dirt or obvious decomposition nearby. In other words, it would have been difficult not to notice it during the previous search, as the area had already been searched. Nevertheless, all those who had participated in previous searches swore that they had not seen any remains. So how did the skull end up there? Could animals have moved the remains? It is possible, but in that case, other bones are usually found nearby, within a radius of several dozen feet. Nothing of the sort was found. A forensic examination was unable to determine the cause of death from the skull. There were no obvious signs of gunshot wounds, fractures, or anything similar. The teeth more or less matched Jack's records, as his dentist confirmed some unique fillings. The rest of the skeleton was gone, along with his clothes and backpack. The police took statements from a couple of tourists who found the skull. They claimed that they were walking along a trail at the foot of the cliff, where the search had already taken place, when they suddenly saw something white on the rocks. That was all. In the end, county officers issued a formal resolution. In the absence of other evidence and signs of violent death, the case is not classified as suspicious. The cause of death has not been determined. The body was found partially intact, and DNA or dental evidence confirmed that it was Mr. Jack Everett. Questions surrounding the death remain open, but there will be no criminal investigation. For Emily, this moment was a heavy relief. At least she knew her husband was dead and was able to hold a symbolic farewell ceremony. However, too many questions remained. Why did no one notice his body, and how did his skull float up where people were already walking? Why were no other parts of the skeleton preserved? In any case, the story of July 15, 1997, when 39-year-old Jack Everett stepped away to tie his shoelaces and his wife walked ahead of him for just a moment, remains one of the most terrifying mysteries of Palo Duro Canyon. No scream, no sound, no struggle. People were walking along the trail, the sun was high in the sky, the wind was gently rustling the bushes, and suddenly a man was gone, as if a secret door to reality had opened. Since then, local rescuers have been debating the case. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find a single clue for a week. And 6 months later, the skull was found almost in plain sight. As a result, the police closed the case as an accident with unknown circumstances. But for the family, friends, searchers, and those interested in mysterious disappearances, it remains an unsolved tragedy, one that could easily be added to the long list of unexplained cases in American parks and canyons. In March 2001, a mysterious disappearance occurred in Big Bend National Park in southwestern Texas, which is still discussed by hiking enthusiasts and unofficially classified as a missing 411 story. 28-year-old Amanda Fields, who had come to the park with a group of friends for a long weekend, disappeared in a matter of moments during a leisurely hike along the Lost Mine Trail, one of the most famous and popular trails in the local tourist community. According to her friends, the trip was spontaneous. Early March is usually dry season in Texas, and the weather promised a warm, clear day with no surprises. Amanda and her friends, 5 people in total, arrived at the park early in the morning and parked at the start of the Lost Mine Trail, popular for its magnificent views of the mountain ranges. According to friends, the trail itself was not considered dangerous or physically demanding. It was about 5 miles long, with a moderate elevation gain, and many hikers, including seniors and families, easily completed it in a few hours. The group brought water and light snacks and planned to return to Terlingua in the afternoon to spend the night at a campground. Along the way, Amanda kept up cheerfully, stopping occasionally to take pictures of the scenery. She was an avid amateur photographer and tried to capture the midday sun shining on the rocky outcrops from the best angle. Soon, the group reached one of the key vantage points, where many people stopped to admire the valley and take memorable photos. There were indeed quite a few tourists around, the weather was unusually good, and the Lost Mine Trail is not usually deserted at this time of year. According to her friends, this is where it happened. The 4 of them, except Amanda, moved forward a few steps, shouting back and forth about where to stop for a break, and Amanda fell behind by just a few seconds to take one more photo. Someone from the group turned around and asked, "Amanda, are you okay?" She nodded. "I'll catch up soon." And then they lost sight of her as they rounded a small bend in the trail. Literally 5 minutes later, they stopped and looked around. Amanda was gone. At first, no one panicked, deciding that she had just lingered behind to find a good angle. But after a couple more minutes, her friends became concerned and went back along the trail, calling, "Amanda, where are you?" There was no answer. They asked other tourists if they had seen the girl with the camera. Someone remembered that she seemed to have passed by, but no one was sure. With each passing moment, they began to feel more and more afraid, because disappearing in broad daylight in good weather on a crowded trail seemed unrealistic. Her friends searched all the nearby bushes and looked in the impassable areas under the rocks, but to no avail. An hour later, they reported it to the ranger at the entrance, and soon the park's security guards were alerted. A large-scale search and rescue operation began, involving volunteers, tourists, and several rangers. The search that day yielded no results. No one saw Amanda leave the trail, no one heard any cries, and nothing suspicious was noticed. The area around Lost Mine is partially open, covered in places with chaparral and low pine trees, with desert plains stretching out below. Stray from the trail, and you encounter rocky terrain and thick thickets of thorny plants. With people on the route, it is usually difficult to hide unnoticed. However, everything suggested that Amanda had vanished into thin air. On the second day, dog handlers joined the search, trying to get the dogs to sniff her jacket, which had been left in the car. According to one ranger, the dogs picked up the scent from the parking lot to the key point on the route where Amanda's friends had last seen her, but soon lost the trail, unable to find a clear direction. Either the scent was lost, or the wind mixed the trails. The weather remained sunny and dry, so weather was not a factor. On the third day, local rescue helicopters were called in. They flew over the Lost Mine area, wooded areas, and rocky cliffs. Amanda was still not found. There were few similar cases on the sheriff's missing persons list, but people did sometimes go missing in the Big Bend, usually during extreme heat and water shortages or during autumn floods. However, there was neither particularly high temperatures nor flooding. By the end of the 5th day, when hope was still alive, something happened that did not add clarity, but only reinforced the aura of mystery. One of the volunteers searching the more distant part of the trail came across a jacket. From the description, it was the same lightweight windbreaker that Amanda had taken with her, just in case, if the wind picked up. The jacket was hanging neatly on a thorny bush, as if someone had deliberately hung it on a branch so that it would be noticed. Based on its location, it was clear that the bush was off the main route, about half a mile from the last place Amanda was seen, but 2 miles away along the trail. Of course, dogs and police had searched that area, but they couldn't figure out how the jacket got there. What's more, search parties had already combed that section of the trail and hadn't seen anything, so could it have been hung there later? And if so, by whom? The next day, another discovery, Amanda's phone. It wasn't a very bulky model by 2001 standards, most likely an early cell phone. It was spotted by a tourist on the trail itself, supposedly lying on the edge where people usually stop before the climb. It was strange that the spot had been checked the day before and no phone had been seen. Was it definitely hers? They checked. There was a sticker on the back that matched the one she had stuck on, and her family recognized it. Again, judging by the condition of the phone, it didn't seem to have been lying in the heat for many days, and it looked almost clean, without a layer of dust or dirt. This added to the sense of unease. It was as if someone had deliberately planted the items, carefully placing them where they would sooner or later be found. There was no explanation as to who could have done this. Friends insisted, "We don't believe Amanda deliberately scattered her belongings to cover her tracks, especially since she had no reason to disappear and torment us." The police began to investigate the theory that an unknown perpetrator had kidnapped Amanda and left her belongings behind as a taunt. But there were no witnesses or motives, and it was a sparsely populated area, albeit with many tourists. No one had noticed any suspicious people or signs of violence. Days passed, then weeks. The girl's parents remained in the Big Bend area, hoping for a miracle, but they found nothing except these 2 items. Unfortunately, the dogs were again unsuccessful. The windbreaker and phone had no fresh scent, and the dogs picked up a confused trail that disappeared after a few feet. By the end of the 3rd week, rescuers officially suspended the search. The result? The girl was never found. No body, no living person, not even a trace indicating her route from the trail. These 3 Texas stories remind us how unpredictable and mysterious nature can be, even in places where it is well known and thoroughly studied. People go out for a routine walk or fishing trip and suddenly disappear without any signs of a struggle or any explainable reason. Their fates remain unsolved mysteries of the Texas parks and swamps, a disturbing reminder that sometimes reality is far more mysterious than any theory. That's all for now, friends. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and comment. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to be the first to know about new mysterious stories and mysterious disappearances. Take care, be careful, and remember, reality is sometimes much more mysterious than any legend.